They call this space Listeneth, a temple of flavor, a cathedral of five-star ego. I call it the pit, a boiling, screaming cage where I learned just how much a person can hate the taste of success when they didn't earn it honestly. My name is Marcus. To everyone here, I am the dishwasher, the ghost in the back, soaking grease, stacking porcelain, and ensuring the tools of culinary art are spotless. I was meant to be invisible. That was my primary job requirement for this operation. Stay hidden, stay quiet, and endure. Chef Julian Thorne stood at the center of the kitchen, shining brighter and radiating more heat than any gas burner. Julian was a legend, a television darling, a man whose face adorned every glossy food magazine. He had 5 stars from The Connoisseur's Ledger. 5 stars is a lifetime achievement. It meant his restaurant was untouchable. Julian was untouchable. I watched him, not with admiration, but with the cold professional eye of a surgical auditor. He demanded perfection from his staff, but he delivered only arrogance. He saw the line cooks as extensions of his genius. He saw me, the black man working the triple sink, as a fixture, a machine that scrubbed. He never used my name. It was always sink or glove, or sometimes when he was feeling generous, hey, you? Tonight was the rush. It was a Saturday, reservation lists booked 6 months out. The air was thick with time, sweat, and impending disaster. Julian was plating his signature dish, the Ascent, a delicate tower of quail, rare mushrooms, and gold leaf. It was his masterpiece, the dish that sealed his 5-star rating last year. He was fussing over one specific plate. It was going to a VIP table, the kind of table where decisions were made, deals were struck, and careers were launched or ended. I kept my head down, shoulders aching, pulling the final, massive rack of cutlery from the industrial sanitizer. The heat and steam blurred my vision. That's when the mistake happened. Not mine. His. Julian was so preoccupied with placing a tiny sprig of chervil, he nudged the platter, holding the quail legs waiting for assembly. It wasn't a catastrophic spill. Just 2 small, perfectly roasted quail legs tumbled off the stainless steel counter and onto the pristine gray-tiled floor near my station. The silence that followed was terrifying. Every cook froze. You could hear the distant, genteel laughter from the dining room. Julian slowly turned around. His face was blotchy red, his eyes fixed not on the ruined quail, but on me. Sink, he spat. The name was a whip crack. I straightened up, immediately adopting the posture of profound apologies, even though I was 8 feet away, wiping down a stainless steel splash guard. Chef, I asked, my voice low and neutral. Did you move that rack just now? Did you bump the counter? His voice was low, dangerous. No, chef. I was stacking the flatware, I replied, pointing toward the high mobile cart, where the knives and forks now rested. Julian walked over to the quail legs. He didn't pick them up. He just stared at the floor, and then stared at me again, letting his rage boil. You are a distraction, Senk. You are clumsy. You lack the awareness needed to occupy this space. This is a 5-star kitchen, not a cafeteria line. The implication was clear. I was too common. My presence itself was a contaminant to his sacred, celebrated food. He kicked one of the quail legs under the counter, a petty act of violence. Look at you. You just stand there, breathing my air, making this area cluttered and filthy. You've ruined this plate. That's hundreds of dollars wasted because you couldn't stay still. Chef, I didn't touch anything. You looked away, I insisted softly. I knew I was pressing my luck, but the truth needed to be stated, even if he didn't hear it. Julian took 2 heavy steps toward me. He leaned in, his chef whites immaculate and towering over my simple industrial grey uniform. You know your place, don't you? Your place is to clean up what the talented people create, not to talk back, not to distract, not to offer your pathetic, useless opinion on my methodology. He grabbed a fresh, empty silver platter, waiting on the heating element. It was cold. He threw it violently against the nearby wall. It didn't shatter, it just rang loudly, a metallic shriek that pierced the kitchen noise. Get out of my sight. Go clean the storage basement. You are incompetent. You are a liability. And frankly, your presence is just bad for the atmosphere of this room. He paused, gathering his breath, looking down his nose at me. I don't need liabilities, especially ones who think they have a say in my kitchen. You are fired. Clean out your locker now. Security will escort you out. Fired. Just like that. Over 2 quail legs that he knocked over himself. The kitchen staff kept working, pretending not to hear. They knew this was Julian's way. He needed a victim, a scapegoat, someone he could erase to maintain his illusion of genius. I nodded once, slowly. The adrenaline was draining away, replaced by a deep, cold, settled calm. Yes, Chef Julian, I said, making sure I used his full name this time. I walked toward the small, dank locker room. I didn't rush. I moved with the purposeful calm of a man who has just finished his assignment. I reached my locker. It was small and grey, secured with a cheap padlock. I opened it and pulled out my small worn backpack. Inside, resting carefully beside a clean pair of scrubs, was a small leather-bound notebook and a highly polished silver pen. I didn't look at the other employees. I didn't look back at the raging Chef Julian. I sat down on the narrow bench and opened the notebook to the section labeled Listeneth. I pulled the silver pen out, noting the heft of it. It was engraved with a single elegant monogram, M.L. I was Marcus Lewis, not the dishwasher. I was the senior, investigative food inspector for The Connoisseur's Ledger, the magazine that gave Julian his 5 stars, the publication that paid me handsomely to spend 6 months working jobs just like this, scrubbing floors and hauling trash, to see the rot underneath the expensive tablecloths. Julian believed in a facade. He believed his Michelin star chefs and his overpriced ingredients were the measure of his success. He never understood that true quality wasn't found in the dining room, but in the dish pit, where the staff breaks, where the systems fail, and where the masks drop. He had just given me the final damning piece of evidence I needed, a clear demonstration of uncontrolled temper, mismanagement, and most importantly, profoundly biased and classist workplace abuse. He hadn't just ruined a plate, he had ruined his entire rating. I uncapped the pen. The silver caught the dim fluorescent light. My final entry for Listeneth needed only 3 words. I paused, realizing the gravity of the power in my hands. I was the lowest of the low in his eyes. And now I held the nuclear button to his career. I wrote the words down, firmly. Contempt for labor. The decision was made. The review was finished. Now, I just needed to deliver the news. I closed the notebook, placed it back in my bag and walked out. The security guard was waiting, looking awkward. "Locker's empty," I informed him. "You going to wait for your final check?" he asked hesitantly. "No," I replied, a small cold smile touching my lips. "I think they owe me much more than that." I walked through the back halls, past the silent kitchen, and out into the crisp night air. I didn't go home. I went straight to my office downtown, the one Julian didn't know existed. I had a phone call to make, a call that would change culinary history and revoke Julian's lifetime of entitlement, all because he couldn't handle 2 ruined quail legs and he couldn't see the man scrubbing his grease traps. The magazine cover had to be updated. Immediately, The retraction was going to be brutal. The headline was already forming in my mind. But first, I needed to brief my editor on the specifics of the abuse. I needed to ensure the public understood why 5 stars were being stripped away. Not just that they were. This was about justice, not merely inspection. I walked out of the service door. The metallic clang echoed the hollowness in my chest. Chef Julian's words still burned. You people don't understand quality. You only understand scrubbing floors. I stopped just outside the dumpster alley. The smell of rotting waste felt fitting. It mirrored the taste Julian's arrogance left in my mouth. It wasn't just about the job. It was about the way he looked at me, as if my life, my history, my very existence was disposable refuse. I adjusted the cheap backpack strap across my shoulder. My hands were still wet and chapped from the industrial soap. For 3 months, I had been Elias, the quiet, compliant black dishwasher, invisible, easily ignored. That invisibility was my greatest tool. They say you can only truly judge a kitchen when you stand where the powerful never look, in the steam, near the drains, listening to the whispered secrets of the staff. Julian thought he was firing a nobody. He thought he was dismissing a complaint about a slightly greasy plate. What he actually did was trigger a nuclear launch sequence. I reached into the inner pocket of my thin jacket. I pulled out a small encrypted recording device. It looked like a flash drive. It had captured every word. The specific microaggression earlier that week, the explicit threats, and finally, the explosion today. His voice, high-pitched with contempt, was safely secured. This humiliation was the price of admission, the final, damning evidence required for my investigation. I wasn't Elias the dishwasher. I was Silas Thorne. And for the last 15 years, my anonymous reviews, published under the pseudonym The Palette, had dictated whether restaurants lived or died. I had earned my reputation by being meticulous. I never relied on surface glamour or PR stunts. I wanted the true soul of a dining experience, the way the staff was treated, the integrity of the ingredients, the respect for the labor. Chef Julian's prestigious 5-star restaurant, the Apex, was supposed to be the pinnacle of culinary artistry. It was, instead, a monument to exploitation and casual cruelty. I started this inspection 6 months ago. The rumors of labor abuse and racist favoritism were too strong to ignore. I needed to see it from the lowest rung. My editor, Veronica, had fought me on this. Silas, it's too dangerous, too demeaning. I insisted. If I want the truth, I need to be in the place where they think no one is watching. And they hadn't been watching me. They watched the white waiters. They watched the sous chefs. They didn't watch the black man scrubbing pots. I walked 3 blocks before I hailed a cab. I gave the driver a downtown address. Not my usual home, but a sterile safe house I used during deep undercover work. During the ride, I pulled out my secure phone, the one Elias the dishwasher didn't own. I bypassed the VPN, unlocked the encryption layer, and opened a draft email I had pre-written weeks ago. It was titled simply Final Submission, The Apex. I attached the audio file and a 60-page report I had compiled, using notes scribbled onto paper towels and inside menus. The report covered the systemic abuse of undocumented kitchen workers, the wage theft, the corner cutting on sanitation when the health inspectors weren't due, and now the final explosive chapter, the overt recorded racism of the celebrated Chef Julian, culminating in my wrongful termination. I reread the final sentence of my draft review. It was concise, devastating. The Apex is a magnificent shell built on the crushed spirits of its lowest employees. Its food tastes ultimately of moral decay. I paused before hitting send. This was not a petty revenge. This was justice delivered with surgical precision. This was the consequence of believing your celebrity makes you untouchable. I remembered the look on Julian's face when he slammed the checkbook on the counter and told me to get out. The absolute certainty of his superiority. That look was about to crumble. I closed my eyes for a moment. The pain of the humiliation was still sharp. It was a useful pain. It fueled the clarity of my decision. I hit send. The email went directly to Veronica, my editor-in-chief, and to Mr. Chen, our primary legal counsel. The wheels were turning now. They moved fast. Within the hour, the magazine's legal team would begin the process of verifying the audio and scheduling the immediate high-priority meeting with the publisher. No leaks, no advanced warning for Julian. The announcement would be dropped simultaneously, the publication of my damning review and the immediate revocation of the Apex's 5-star rating, a rating we had personally championed 3 years prior. Julian was scheduled for a massive television appearance next Monday, a segment on national morning news celebrating his culinary integrity. I looked at the date on my phone. Today was Friday. He had exactly 3 days to enjoy the last moments of his celebrated career. 3 days until the truth, my truth, hit the front page. I leaned my head against the cool cab window. Elias the dishwasher was gone. Silas Thorne was back. And he was very, very hungry for justice. My next action was simple. Necessary maintenance. I needed to contact the health department anonymously about a specific serious sanitation violation I had witnessed yesterday. A small tremor before the earthquake. I reached the safe house. A cramped, silent apartment, high above the city. My sanctuary. The real work started now. The emotional labor of transforming raw pain into undeniable public truth. I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked, awaiting my narrative. I decided to start with the precise moment Julian called me the help. That was the key. That was the sentence that sealed his fate. August's voice was a whip, even after the kitchen door swung shut behind me. Don't let the door hit you, Elijah. Go find a diner where your low standards fit. My body was shaking, but not from fear. It was the white-hot shock of the insult, the absolute waste of my dignity. I walked past the prep line, heads down. Every sous chef and line cook looked away. They were complicit in their silence. They had to be. Rent needed paying. I peeled off the cheap too-large apron. It felt heavier than lead. It carried the smell of Augustus' burnt arrogance and his old, stale oil. I looked at the stainless steel counters one last time. I had polished these surfaces until they gleamed like mirrors. I knew every crack in the tile. And now, in his mind, I was erased. Just another disposable hand. I stepped out into the humid evening air of the alley. I leaned against the brick, trying to stabilize my breathing. I let the harsh noise of the city wash over the quiet space August had imposed on me. I needed to remember who I actually was. For 4 years I had maintained this perfect illusion, the humble, quiet worker, the man August believed he owned. I chose this invisibility. It was the only way to truly gauge a restaurant's soul. You cannot tell who a chef is by their smiling appearance in the dining room. You tell by how they treat the lowest paid person in the building, the one who cleans the grease traps. August had failed the test, catastrophically. He hadn't just fired Elijah the dishwasher. He had insulted the specter. I pulled out my secured phone, the one August thought was only used for bus schedules and cheap entertainment. It was encrypted. It was linked directly to the editorial director of the Culinary Review Quarterly. I texted Amelia, my managing editor. Just 3 words that signaled the end of my deep cover operation. Initiate the file. No explanation was needed. She knew the protocol. If the undercover operation was compromised by systemic moral failure, the investigation accelerated immediately. I didn't go home. I went to the small, sterile office space I rented downtown. The one absolutely nobody knew about. My secondary life. Inside, the lighting was soft, focused, and cold. My cleaning uniform went into a secure, hermetically sealed bag. I would never wear it again. I sat down in front of the custom workstation. The screen glowed softly, displaying the official masthead of the magazine, and right next to it, the reason for August's existence. 5 golden stars. The achievement he claimed defined his entire life. I opened the secure portal. The magazine system was designed for objective culinary analysis, flavor profiles, presentation, sourcing. But there was also a critical, rarely used section, ethical integrity review. I had never had to use it this harshly before. Most restaurants just needed minor corrections or a serious management change. Augusta needed structural collapse. The memory of his sneer, his casual dismissal of my worth, sharpened my focus. It refined my language. I started typing, not a review, but an official, legally binding inspection report detailing the operating environment. Establishment, Le Grand Auguste. Violation code, E4. Systemic staff degradation, abuse of protected classes. I pulled up the time-stamped security footage. I had installed the tiny cameras months ago, using my janitorial access while August was performing for the cameras. I didn't even need the audio. August's face, contorted in ugly, dismissive anger, screaming across the vast, pristine kitchen was evidence enough. He thought he was protected by his supposed genius. He thought his Michelin status meant talent excused genuine cruelty. He was utterly wrong. 5 stars wasn't just about the sauce or the plating. It was about the soul of the establishment. And Auguste's soul was profoundly bankrupt. I finalized the digital submission. I reviewed the entire document twice, ensuring the language was clinical, factual, and completely devoid of personal rage. This was not revenge. This was professional justice. I clicked Submit. The system instantly confirmed the receipt. The revocation process was now officially underway. The magazine's legal and editorial teams were already moving. I closed the laptop slowly, savoring the silence. The dishwasher had been fired with contempt. The spectre had responded with precise institutional force. The clock had started ticking on Auguste's entire empire. The official process takes 48 hours to finalize before the public announcement hits the wires. 48 hours until Auguste receives the official, devastating notification. 48 hours until his world exploded. I stood up, leaving the silent office. I had one more piece of crucial evidence to secure before the magazine's team went fully public. The real reason Auguste had been quietly struggling, buried deep in his compromised accounts. That final, sharp nail needed to be in place. I knew exactly where to look. The smell of burnt sugar and panic was the usual aroma of a Saturday night at Julian's. I had been there 7 weeks. 7 weeks of wiping down counters slick with desperation. 7 weeks listening to Julian scream words that were not about food, but about power. I knew he was testing me, pushing me. He needed to see how much I would tolerate before breaking. I needed to see how far he would push before he revealed his true rot. He wasn't just a terrible boss to me. He was systemic poison to the entire staff. He treated the line cooks like disposable robots. He treated the black and brown porters like furniture that sometimes moved. That was the observation I needed, the true depth of the degradation. It was not enough to write a review that said the risotto was too salty. I had to write a story about a man whose ego had spoiled the very foundation of his establishment. That night, Julian was trying to land a new magazine cover, a big profile. He was stressed, moving too fast, shouting too loud. Every plate had to be perfect, every garnish placed with surgical precision. He was working on his signature piece, The truffle scallop tower, an architectural marvel of arrogance and cream. The pressure cooker was heating up. I saw him reach for the finishing oil, a rare, expensive bottle of white truffle essence, and his hand slipped. The bottle shattered on the marble floor. The overwhelming smell instantly filled the kitchen, followed by a terrifying silence. It was $1,000 worth of flavoring, gone. The sound of shattering glass was immediately followed by the sound of Julian's rising fury. He didn't look down at the oil. He looked straight at the nearest target. Me! You! He hissed. His face was the color of raw beef. Elias! Did you leave that section wet? I stood perfectly still, my hands submerged in the soapy water. Chef, I cleaned that station 3 minutes ago. It was dry, I replied, keeping my voice level, almost clinical. The lie didn't even require thought on his part. It was reflex. Liar, he snarled, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous volume only the front staff wouldn't hear. You always leave a residue. You people can't manage simple tasks. Always careless, always rushing. You people. I let the words hang there, heavy, humid, and exactly what I had been waiting for him to say. My stomach clenched, not from fear, but from the cold satisfaction of having successfully baited him into saying the unsayable. He needed someone to blame for the mistake that was undeniably his own, and the black guy in the corner was the cheapest liability he could find. You've tainted the environment, Julian spat, pointing at the floor, then waving his hand dismissively toward my station. I smell incompetence. I smell apathy. Get your things. You're fired. The line cooks froze. The porter stopped scrubbing a steel pot. Everyone knew it was unjust, but nobody dared look Julian in the eye. Right now, Elias, clean out your locker and be off my property. I don't pay you to be a distraction. I don't pay you to be careless. You will never set foot in a five-star kitchen again. He seemed truly proud of that last statement. He believed he held the keys to my entire future. He believed he had the power to decree that I, Elias Thorne, was eternally relegated to the scrubbing brushes and the back entrance. I slowly pulled my hands out of the hot water. The cheap rubber gloves stuck to my skin. I took them off, finger by careful finger, reversing the gloves so they turned inside out. I placed them neatly on the rim of the steel sink. Then I reached behind the cleaning cart where I kept my battered old duffel bag. Julian was still ranting, moving toward the plating station, assuring the cooks that the problem was now gone and they could resume operation. Hurry up, he barked without turning around. I don't need you lingering, breathing down my air. I zipped my bag slowly. My heart, which had been racing for 7 weeks, now felt utterly calm. It was time. The mission was complete. I walked toward the kitchen exit, past Julian, past the line cooks who offered me fleeting, sympathetic glances. I didn't acknowledge anyone. My eyes were fixed only on the man who had just stolen my dignity and my job in front of witnesses. As I passed Julian, he was meticulously plating the truffle scallop tower, the very dish that defined his career. I stopped just a foot behind him. You said I was careless, chef, I said quietly, making sure my voice carried over the sizzling sounds of the kitchen. Julian stiffened, clearly annoyed that I hadn't vanished instantly. I said you were done. Now go. I didn't move. Just before I leave, I continued, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out the small black leather journal I used constantly. It wasn't my reviewer's notebook. It was much smaller. I need you to know I have completed my observations, he scoffed, adjusting his toque. Observations? You're a dishwasher. What could you possibly observe that matters? Your behavior, I said, my voice hardening slightly. The temperature of the steam oven, the consistency of the stock, and, Chef Julian, the structural integrity of your finances. Julian finally turned around, a sharp, patronizing laugh escaping his throat. You are truly pathetic, Elias. You think because I fired you, you can threaten me. I looked down at the journal in my hand, tapping the cover lightly. I don't need threats, Chef. I need information, and I have all of it. I looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time without the shield of servitude. He saw something shift in my expression. The dullness of the overworked dishwasher was replaced by a sharp, intelligent clarity that unnerved him. I then pulled out my phone. It was the latest model, sleek and professional, completely out of place next to the worn denim of my uniform. I quickly composed a message, a highly coded message I had prepared days ago. It wasn't going to a lawyer. It wasn't going to the union. It was going to the editor-in-chief of Gourmand International. The message was 3 words long. Initiate Protocol Beta. The confirmation tone chimed almost instantly. The first domino had fallen, and Julian didn't even hear the crash. Enjoy your truffle scallop tower, Chef, I said, finally stepping toward the back door. It's the last time anyone will ever see it with 5 stars attached. Julian stood frozen, unsure how to process the sudden confidence of the man he had just declared worthless. He watched me go, his face shifting from rage to confusion, a feeling he wasn't used to experiencing. I pushed the door open, shedding the humid air of the kitchen for the cool night air of the alley. The kitchen was still scrambling, still serving, still functioning under the illusion of perfection. But the process had begun. I didn't just lose my job. I had just purchased the perfect leverage. Now, all I had to do was wait for the magazine to arrive, and for the world to learn what happens when you mistake a 5-star critic for a mere dishwasher. I walked out the back door. The greasy, humid air clung to my clothes. I had just been fired. I had just been told I wasn't good enough to touch Julian's silver. I didn't stop to look back at the kitchen. That chapter was closed, but the humiliation was still fresh. It felt like a stain I couldn't scrub away. I crossed the alley, breathing deep. I needed the city air to clear the smell of the fryer oil and Julian's toxic superiority. My transformation was waiting for me. 2 blocks down, tucked into a quiet side street, I stripped the apron and the faded polyester shirt. They felt like rough sackcloth against my skin, the uniform of invisibility. I put on my armor. It wasn't a disguise. It was my truth. A bespoke suit, midnight blue, perfectly tailored. A quiet statement of authority. The weight of the silk tie felt comforting, grounding. In the car window, I saw the reflection of a man Julian had never allowed himself to see. Not Elijah the dishwasher, sweating over industrial detergent, but Vance, the critic, the inspector, the signature that determined futures. I placed my instruments carefully in my inside pocket, my specialized pen, my official notebook, my accreditation card. The feeling of stepping into my true self was overwhelming. It was cold, sharp, and entirely professional. The anger was still there, but now it was disciplined. It was channeled into precise observation. I walked back toward the restaurant. I didn't use the service entrance. I used the grand mahogany front doors. The maître d' greeted me with empty respect, the kind of instant deference that my work uniform had guaranteed I would never receive. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" "Once," I said. "Table for 1." My table was positioned perfectly, central but private. I could observe the dining room, the rhythm of the servers, the subtle panic beneath the polished veneer. I felt Julian's presence immediately. He was in the pass, his face red, shouting something about a missed garnish. The same sharp, cruel energy that had just stripped me of my livelihood. I watched him move, confident, pompous, utterly untouchable in his domain. I ordered the full tasting menu. I ordered the specific plate, the scallops with saffron reduction. The plate Julian had claimed I ruined with my incompetence just an hour earlier. The waitstaff was impeccable, too perfect, a well-oiled machine built on the fear of their chef's volatile temper. The first plate arrived. It was art, every element in its precise designated place. Julian was a technical master. I conceded that much. But as E. Vance, I wasn't reviewing the plating. I was reviewing the soul. I picked up the fork. I took a bite of the scallop. I tasted the rushed prep. The reduction was slightly too acidic. A corner cut because Julian had prioritized shouting over tasting. I knew the moment he made that reduction. I saw him rush it earlier that afternoon. As the dishwasher, I was told to shut up and clean the pans. As the critic, I was the final authority. I pulled out my notebook. The pristine white pages contrasted violently with the memory of the greasy stainless steel sink. My notes were specific. I didn't just write about flavor. Hygiene protocol enforcement lapse. I remembered the corner where the kitchen staff piled boxes too close to the prep station. Julian knew it was a violation. He ignored it for convenience. Temperature inconsistency. The dishwasher who cleaned the thermometer knew exactly when it was miscalibrated. Julian refused to replace it, claiming the reading was close enough. I wrote about the noise, the constant, destructive verbal abuse flowing from the pass. It corrupted the atmosphere. It killed the creativity. It was the hidden ingredient in every dish. I heard the dining room shift. Julian was finishing his walk around. He was seeking validation. He scanned the room, looking for influential faces. He saw me, the impeccable suite, the intense focus on the plate, the leather-bound notebook. His expression changed instantly. He recognized the signs of someone important. His anger vanished, replaced by a veneer of slick, forced friendliness. He glided toward my table. The arrogance was still there, but wrapped in a layer of professional charm. "Good evening, sir," he purred, stopping beside me. "Chef Julien d'Anjou, I see you've sampled the scallops. Everything to your absolute satisfaction." He waited for the expected gushing praise. His eyes flickered down to my plate, then to my face. Did he recognize the set of my jaw? The shape of my eyes? He looked, but he didn't see. He only saw a high-spending guest. I set down my fork deliberately. I dabbed my lips with the linen napkin. I met his gaze. "Chef Julien," I confirmed, my voice measured and low. I ensured my voice carried none of the deference he was used to hearing from me. I took the notebook off the table and held it up slightly. The embossed logo caught the warm light of the dining room. The Gastronomic Quarterly Review. Julian's eyes locked onto the logo. His body went rigid, freezing in the act of offering false hospitality. The color drained from his face, leaving the blotchy red from the kitchen visible beneath the sudden pallor. He didn't just recognize the magazine, he recognized the gravity of my presence. A 5-star rating, a Michelin potential. It all hinged on this review. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at me again, really looked, past the suite, past the perceived wealth. The memory of the dishwasher, fired an hour earlier, collided with the reality of the powerful man sitting at his table. "I assure you," I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice still calm, "I have a great deal of satisfaction to report, chef, though perhaps not the kind you were hoping for." I flipped the notebook open to the page where I had written my concluding remarks. "We need to discuss," I continued, "the true cost of the service here." Julian tried to laugh it off, a desperate, strangled sound. "Wait, you were the new..." I was, I confirmed, cutting him off cleanly. I was the man you called careless, the man you believed was unworthy of respect because I cleaned your residue. I pushed the notebook closer to him, pointing to the heading of my section titled, The Culture of Excellence versus the Tyranny of the Chef. This isn't just a review of the food, chef. It's an inspection of the environment. Julian began to sweat. He glanced wildly around the dining room, terrified of a scene. We can discuss the details of your termination of an employee, I told him quietly, my eyes boring into his. Right now. Or we can discuss it tomorrow with my legal counsel and the magazine's ethics board. Your choice, chef. He swallowed hard, his entire posture shrinking under the weight of my authority. The tables had turned, swiftly and completely. He was suddenly smaller than the dishwasher he had just dismissed. I waited for his decision, watching the horror of his ruined reputation flood his eyes. This was only the beginning of the justice. He stared at the small heavy card in his hand. The gold-embossed lettering caught the kitchen lights. Chef Dubois looked at the card. He looked at me. He looked back at the card, shaking. He stammered my name. J. Vance. Julian Vance. He knew the name. Everyone in this world knew the name. Julian Vance. The name that carried the weight of 4 continents of gastronomy. The critic that could elevate a diner or shut down a 5-star establishment overnight. He swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a shaking hand. This is some kind of joke, isn't it? His voice was thin, high-pitched. The raw was gone. I reached up and slowly unhooked the dirty apron, letting it fall silently to the grease-stained floor. Beneath it, I wore a crisp, dark cashmere blend shirt. The contrast was deliberate, the symbol of the 2 worlds he thought should never meet. I assure you, chef, I said, my voice low and steady, it is no joke. I've been here for 3 weeks. Your dishwasher, your porter, your boy. He started to sputter apologies, reaching out a hand toward me. Mr. Vance, I thought you were just new staff. We have a policy. We treat all staff equally, I swear. I raised my hand, stopping him cold. No, chef, I corrected him gently. You treated me exactly how you treat every member of your non-white, non-executive staff. That was the point of my visit. I stepped around the overturned bucket. I didn't raise my voice, but the entire kitchen staff, the cooks, the line prep, the terrified young apprentices, were frozen, listening. Your food, chef, I continued, ticking off the points slowly, methodically. It is technically flawless, precise, arrogant, but undeniably perfect on the plate. His chest puffed out infinitesimally, even in this moment of terror. He grasped for the compliment, the hope. But your kitchen, Chef Dubois, I continued, letting the silence hang heavy. Your empire is built on rot. It is built on deliberate exploitation, on systemic cruelty disguised as rigor. He began to argue. He pointed to the clock. The hours are standard for high volume, Mr. Vance. The hours are illegal, chef, I stated simply. And when the only working industrial sprayer broke 2 weeks ago, the one I repeatedly begged you to fix, you told me to scrub everything by hand for 3 12-hour shifts, with water so hot it blistered my skin, because the budget for equipment repair was not a priority. I looked him straight in his bloodshot, terrified eyes. That wasn't just neglect, chef. That was punishment. It was a calculated display of power over a man you assumed had no recourse. I detailed the specific microaggressions. The way he always called the black staff the boys, regardless of their age or position. The way he docked the wages of the immigrant staff for minuscule errors, while patting his white sous chef on the back for burning a garnish. You called me slow, lazy, and you used language in these walls that I will not repeat in my review, chef. But you used it. His face was ghostly white now. He looked suddenly old, defeated. I was sent here to review the entire experience of Le Grand Miroir, I explained, using the formal name of his restaurant. And in 2024, the dining experience extends far beyond the palate. It includes the ethics of the supply chain, the sustainability of your sourcing, and crucially, the human cost of your plating. I picked up the discarded press card and slipped it back into my wallet. It felt heavier now, charged with meaning. You failed, chef. Completely. He leaned against the stainless steel counter, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He finally understood that I wasn't there for a quick meal. I was there for the autopsy of his career. Just then, his phone, usually vibrating non-stop with orders and reservations, chimed loudly with a priority email notification. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped the expensive device. He opened the screen. His eyes scanned the header. The color drained instantly from his face, leaving a sickly gray hue. No, he whispered, a denial so weak it was heartbreaking. I watched him. I knew exactly what that email contained. I had sent a preliminary report to my editor 30 minutes ago, immediately following his declaration that I was fired. "What is it, chef?" I asked, feigning professional curiosity. He didn't answer. He just held the phone out toward the kitchen manager, a younger man who looked equally horrified. The manager read the email silently. His eyes widened to impossible sources. The email was from the executive director of the Global Gastronome. It stated that, effective immediately, all upcoming profile features, live cooking appearances, and the highly anticipated 5 Chefs of Paris documentary deal, all focused on Chef Dubois and his restaurant, were being indefinitely suspended. The reason was clear, though clinical. Due to ongoing serious internal investigation regarding operational ethics and staff conduct, we must revoke all current media partnerships and scheduled ratings. Revoked, suspended. His entire future, his brand, his magazine endorsements, all gone in the time it took to send one email. The manager looked at me with dawning, respectful horror. He recognized that this wasn't just a bad review. This was an eradication. I knew that was only the start. The immediate action was to cut off the media relationship that fed his celebrity. The final judgment, the full, devastating critique of his cuisine and his character, was still being written, waiting for tomorrow's publication deadline. "Consider that your notice, chef," I said, walking toward the employee exit door for the last time. I paused before stepping out into the alley. "You fired the dishwasher," I reminded him, meeting his broken gaze. And the critic accepted the termination. I pushed the door open, letting the cool night air rush in, sweeping away the last vestige of the suffocating heat and humiliation of that kitchen. I left him standing there, clutching his phone, already realizing that the 5 stars he had clung to so tightly were not just going to be lowered. They were going to be used to light the pyre of his entire career. The final public consequence was coming, and I had to be ready to step back into my other life, the life he never saw coming, the life that held the pen. Moreau's world was quiet now, too quiet. The sound of the high-pressure dish machine was replaced by the silence of death. I watched him from the private executive suite of the Culinary Review magazine headquarters. He was giving a frantic press conference across the street, in front of his now-shuttered restaurant, a desperate appeal to the public he used to despise. He wore a suit that was too large for his shrinking frame. Sweat plastered his hair to his forehead. He was talking about unfounded allegations, about the unfair pressures of high cuisine and media sensationalism. He mentioned Leon. My name felt hollow and misused on his tongue. He tried to paint himself as the victim of a coordinated smear campaign, but the evidence was overwhelming. We had the audio logs. We had the documented testimony of every porter, every cleaner, every black and brown hand he had ever humiliated behind those kitchen doors. Miss Dubois, the magazine's lead editor, stood beside me. She looked weary but determined. "He just offered us half of the restaurant equity," she whispered, her voice low, "if we agree to issue a soft retraction." I turned to her. My voice was steady, professional. "Tell him the price of dignity is non-negotiable, Miss Dubois." She nodded slowly. She knew this was not about money for me. It was about seeing the system enforce its own moral code, a code Moreau had believed he was utterly exempt from. The magazine's legal team had prepared the final statement. It was brutal in its clarity. He wasn't just losing the stars. He was losing everything tied to those stars. The massive global cookbook deal was cancelled. The television network evaporated his contract instantly. His investors, sensing the public backlash was toxic and irreversible, were liquidating their shares by the hour. Moreau was no longer a celebrated chef. He was a documented liability, a proven bully, a racist. I walked into the main boardroom. This panoramic room directly overlooked the plaza, where Moreau was still pleading his case into microphones he no longer deserved. The entire executive board of the Culinary Review sat at the long table. They were the arbiters of global taste. Now, they were the executors of professional justice. "Mr. Hawthorne," the chairman began, using my true name, Artemis Hawthorne, "we are ready to proceed with the formal announcement." I looked at the finalized cover art for next month's special edition. It was starkly black and white. The headline was merciless: "Beyond the Plating, the True Cost of Genius." I placed my hand on the official document, the final, irreversible notification of the revocation of all accolades. "The narrative must be perfectly clear," I stated, looking at each board member. "This decision is based on irrefutable evidence of systemic abuse and documented racial discrimination in the workplace. It is not just a review adjustment. It is a moral judgment against his conduct." The chairman cleared his throat. "It will be irreversible, Artemis. It ensures he never recovers this status." I smiled faintly. That was precisely the point. I thought back to the humid hell of that dish room, the smell of bleach and burnt grease, the ache in my feet that day, the look of cold, easy superiority on Moreau's face when he told me I didn't belong here. He thought I was insignificant, background noise. He thought my truth was irrelevant because of the simplicity of my job title. Now, my truth was his complete destruction. I nodded once, decisively. "Send the global release now." The phone started ringing immediately, a frantic, high-pitched wave of noise across the massive room. It sounded like a catastrophic market crash. Within minutes, the reporters across the street shifted. Their focus left Moreau instantly. They were reading the incoming push notifications and email alerts. Their faces went pale with shock. Moreau watched them. He saw the change in their posture. He saw the microphone stands slowly dropping. He knew. I didn't need to tell him. The entire world was telling him at once. His face went from desperate pleading to a hollow, utter blankness. The mask of arrogance he had worn for 30 years finally shattered. He turned, his gaze lifting slowly, scanning the corporate tower windows. He couldn't possibly see me, but he felt the presence. He felt the overwhelming weight of Artemis watching him. He knew the dishwasher had just written the final review of his career. I stood there until he finally lowered his gaze and turned his back on the media chaos. He simply walked away from the podium, heading toward the side street, a man stripped of everything but his shame. Justice isn't always loud screaming and fire. Sometimes it is the quiet, dignified removal of a pedestal. I had done what I came to do regarding Moreau, but the job was not entirely finished. The fate of the other kitchen staff was not yet secured. Moreau may be finished, but the systemic mess he created still existed. I picked up my personal phone. I dialed a number I hadn't used in months, the confidential line for the local labor union representative. The game was over for Chef Moreau, but the real quiet work for Leon Hawthorne, the protector, was just beginning. The silence that followed was heavier than any stockpot I had ever lifted. Dubois couldn't move. He stood frozen by the sink, the dish towel still clutched in his hand. He looked at the magazine editor, then back at me. His eyes finally registered the truth. Not just the truth of my identity, but the truth of the consequences. Miles, he whispered. It was the first time he had spoken my name without contempt. It sounded hollow, like a bell struck underwater. Mr. Dubois, I corrected him. The report on Lodas has been finalized. It will be published this afternoon. The editor, Miss Chen, stepped forward. She looked down at the soggy, ruined plate that had caused the entire scene. Chef, she said, her voice clinical and cold, we evaluate culinary excellence, but we also evaluate the environment that creates that excellence. Miles' identity was an ongoing, deeply sensitive evaluation of that moral landscape. Dubois tried to interject, stammering something about a misunderstanding, about stress. I stopped him with a raised hand. It was the only time in the kitchen I had ever assumed authority over him. I didn't just review your soufflé, chef. I reviewed your soul, I stated, and your soul is rotten. It contaminates the brilliance of your execution. He looked around desperately at the remaining kitchen staff. They were all silent witnesses, their faces a mixture of fear, shock, and, for some, quiet satisfaction. They knew the abuses they had endured. You came here under false pretenses, Dubois cried, finally finding his footing in anger. I came here for the truth, I countered. I put on an apron and scrubbed your grout for 8 weeks, chef. I heard what you said about me, about my people, about my potential. You didn't see a talented cook. You saw a disposable black body. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the recording device on Miss Chen's hip clicked subtly. We have the audio, chef. Every word of it. From the moment you suggested I only got the job due to diversity quotas, to your final definitive statement that I ruined your reputation by daring to touch a dish above my station. His face drained of all color. He knew the legal and reputational iron curtain was about to drop. Please, Miles, he pleaded, his voice cracking, the great Chef Dubois reduced to a desperate man. We can talk. We can fix this. You need to understand what 5 stars means. It's my life. I do understand, chef, I said softly. It means the world thinks you are infallible. It means you believed you were untouchable. And that is precisely the danger I report on. I took off the damp, stained apron, folding it neatly on the counter where I usually chopped herbs. The review will state clearly, Lodas is a technical masterpiece built on moral decay. The food is exquisite, but the systemic humiliation and racial degradation of its staff are unacceptable. I confirmed the final judgment with Miss Chen. 5 stars revoked, effective immediately. The story will break globally in less than an hour. We left the kitchen. We walked right past the shocked hostesses and the puzzled early lunch patrons. By the time we reached the street, my phone was buzzing. The internet was already ablaze. Gourmet Zenith had delivered its hammer blow. The headline was stark, L'audace, brilliance built on bigotry. The undercover review. The details were brutal. They didn't just publish my assessment of Dubois' racism. They published his exact dismissive quotes about the uneducated class who dared to work in his kitchen. The immediate fallout was catastrophic. Within 30 minutes, I watched a major food news site announce that Dubois' upcoming book deal had been cancelled. His endorsement contract with a high-end appliance company was terminated. The phone calls started flooding Lodas. Not reservations, but furious cancellations. People didn't just want fine dining, they wanted dignity. The next morning, I stood in my old apartment sipping coffee. I was back in the bespoke suit and cashmere coat, not the cheap dishwasher uniform. A major news outlet had managed to corner Dubois outside his penthouse. He looked aged, defeated, his arrogance completely gone. He muttered something about Miles being manipulative, about this being a calculated attack. I laughed quietly. It wasn't calculated. It was simply the consequence of his character. I had merely provided the platform for the world to see him as he truly was. I had spent weeks experiencing the microaggressions, the dismissals, the daily grind where my worth was measured only by how quiet and subservient I was. I hadn't set out to destroy him. I had set out to inspect the moral structure of one of the world's most lauded institutions. The lesson was clear. If you build your empire on the backs of people you dehumanize, be prepared for one of them to be the executioner of your reputation. A former co-worker from the kitchen, a young Latino cook named Ricardo, messaged me. Chef Dubois is gone. Investors forced him out. They're offering us raises and sensitivity training. It's chaos, but it's clean chaos. Thank you, Miles. I smiled at the screen. The small acts of justice, the quiet dignity of ensuring others would not suffer the same contempt, were the real reward. I picked up my phone and called my agent. I had a deadline for the official final article. It wasn't just about Dubois anymore. It was about defining the new standard for the hospitality industry. A standard where respect wasn't a bonus, but the main ingredient. I had won. Not by fighting Dubois on his terms, but by letting the truth of his character be the poison that undid him. And my journey was just beginning. The industry still had so much rot to expose.